Hello, welcome to IELTS Resource Center podcast, where we dive deep into the world of IELTS preparation. I am Mr. George, your host, and I'm thrilled to bring your essential tips, strategies, and expert advice to help you reach your desired IELTS score. Today, I will be bringing to you an interactive learning experience from IELTS Resource Center online coaching session. Stay tuned.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to help you ace that IELTS listening test.
Yeah, we're drawing on the wisdom of Mr. George from the IELTS Resource Center. He's like the ultimate insider.
He really knows his stuff. So many people find listening tricky.
It's not just about understanding English, though, right? It's
Yeah.
like knowing the test itself.
Exactly. And once you see the patterns and the kind of like the traps they set, it becomes a challenge you can really get into.
Like a puzzle.
Yeah. We're going to break it all down, the format, those sneaky tricks examiners use, and bust some myths along the way.
You'll be walking into that test feeling way more confident.
For sure.
Mr. George, he starts by explaining the structure of the test. He compares it to a hike with different terrains.
Okay, I like that. So the test is 30 minutes long.
Yep, 30 minutes, and it has 4 sections. Each one gets a little harder than the last.
So it's starting off easy.
Exactly. Section 1 is a social conversation, something like booking a hotel. Easy peasy.
Okay, I can handle that. Then what?
Section 2 gets a bit tougher. It's a monologue about local facilities or something like that.
Okay, so a bit more challenging.
Then Section 3 ramps up the intensity. It's a group discussion, often about an academic topic, like students planning a project.
Gotcha. So it's getting pretty academic by this point.
And then Section 4, that's the summit, a full-on academic lecture.
Wow, sounds intense.
It definitely can be. But for those doing the paper-based test, there's good news.
Oh, right, there's extra time for them, yeah.
Exactly. You get an extra 10 minutes at the end to transfer your answers.
Ooh, that's valuable time. Don't want to rush that part.
Definitely not. And speaking of being careful, Mr. George is really big on following instructions.
Oh, yeah, that's got to be important in a test like this.
Super important. One little slip up and you could lose points.
Even if you have the right answer.
Even then. Like if the instructions say no more than 2 words and you write 3 words,
Uh-oh.
yeah, even if they're all correct, you lose points.
Wow, so it's not just about knowing the answer. It's about being precise.
Exactly. Mr. George uses this example. He says, imagine the instruction is, write no more than 2 words and/or a number.
Okay, so pretty specific.
And the question asks, what is the price for one adult? And the audio says, it's $12 for an adult.
Okay, so the answer is $12.
Right, but if you write $12, you'll lose points. Because that's 2 words, A and D, and number.
Ah, tricky. So you have to write just 12.
Exactly. It's all about precision.
Okay, got to pay attention to those details. What other advice does Mr. George have?
Another key tip is previewing the questions before the audio starts.
Makes sense. Get a feel for what's coming.
Yeah, like if a question asks for a date, you'll be primed to listen for numbers or calendar references.
You're already kind of focused on that type of information.
Exactly. And here's where things get really interesting. Mr. George says you got to be ready for synonyms and paraphrasing.
Meaning they won't use the exact words from the question.
Right. Like the question might be, what is the cost of admission? But the audio says you'll need to pay $15.
So you got to make that connection in your head.
Yep, it's testing both vocabulary and comprehension.
That's a good reminder, even for me. While we're listening, what's the best way to keep track of everything?
Mr. George recommends jotting down short notes or even answering directly on the question sheet as you listen.
So don't worry too much about neatness at this point.
Exactly. Just capture those key points.
Got it. Okay, so what about those breaks between sections? Are those like snack breaks?
Not quite. Mr. George says to use those breaks strategically. Quickly scan the upcoming questions and think back to what you just heard.
This is like a mental reset and a chance to strategize.
Exactly. And finally, for those taking the paper-based test, those 10 minutes at the end, they're crucial.
Yeah, that's when you transfer your answers, right?
Yep, got to do that neatly and accurately.
Make sure all that hard work pays off.
Absolutely.
Okay, I feel like we've built a good foundation here.
We have. We've covered the format, instructions, previewing, synonyms, note-taking, using breaks strategically.
Feeling pretty good.
Uh-huh.
But I have a feeling things are about to get more challenging.
You bet. Now we're getting into the really exciting stuff. The hidden traps Mr. George talks about. These are the things that can really trip you up if you're not prepared.
Ooh, I'm ready for the challenge. Lay it on me. What's the first trap we need to watch out for?
The first trap is distractors. Mr. George calls them like landmines. They're designed to test your focus.
Landmines. Sounds intense. So the examiners are actively trying to mislead us.
Yeah, they want to see who really understands versus who's just picking up on keywords.
Makes sense. So how does that work?
Here's an example Mr. George gives. The question asks, where will the meeting take place?
Okay, picturing a conference room now.
But the audio says, the meeting was going to be in room 3A, but we've had to move it to room 4B because of a double booking.
Sneaky. So if you're not paying close attention, you might write down 3A and miss that update.
Exactly. The correct answer is 4B. You gotta listen actively, knowing things can change mid-sentence.
Don't just write down the first thing you hear. Stay sharp. What's the next trap?
Similar sounding words. This one's a classic.
Oh yeah, I can see how that would be tricky. Like 15 and 50 could sound really similar.
Exactly, especially when spoken quickly or with an accent. And it's not just numbers, right?
No, I guess words like peace and peace could be confusing too.
Right. It shows how important it is to actually process the meaning of each word, not just hear it.
So you're listening for context, not just individual words.
Exactly. And speaking of context, accents can make a big difference too, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. I bet that adds another layer of challenge.
It does. Mr. George points out that the IELTS uses a range of accents.
So like British, American, Australian.
All of those. And more. Canadian too.
Wow, that's a lot of variety.
It's good for real-world listening practice.
But definitely adds pressure during the test.
For sure. But Mr. George says the key is familiarization.
Okay, so the more you expose yourself to different accents, the better prepared you'll be.
Exactly. And speaking of feeling overwhelmed, the next trap is a double whammy: speed and overlapping information.
Oh man, I can already feel my brain starting to sweat. That's like trying to take notes during a super fast lecture where the professor keeps jumping between ideas.
That's a great analogy. And Mr. George really emphasizes practicing active listening techniques.
So like focusing on keywords, trying to anticipate what's coming next, and not getting bogged down in every single word.
Exactly. It's all about prioritizing, extracting those key bits of information.
Training your brain to filter out the noise, basically.
Exactly.
Okay, so speed and overlapping information, check. What else should we watch out for?
This one's subtle, but it can really throw you off the order of questions.
Meaning they don't always follow the order of the audio.
Right. Mr. George says while questions usually follow the flow of the audio, sometimes they jump around.
Oh wow, that's tricky.
It is. You can't just assume the questions will perfectly mirror the audio. You got to stay alert and cross-reference the questions with what you're hearing.
So it's like a puzzle, making sure you're putting the pieces in the right spots.
I like that. A puzzle, exactly.
Okay, question order. Got it. What's the last trap?
Multi-part questions. These are tough because they require you to pull out multiple pieces of information from a single audio clip.
So it's like a question with like layers to it, each needing its own answer.
Exactly. For example, the question might be, what 2 things are included in the price of the tour? And the audio might say something like, for this price, you'll get a guided walking tour, a map of the city, and entry to the museum.
Okay, so you need to remember all 3 things: the tour, the map, and the museum entry.
Exactly. It's a test of your attention to detail and your ability to remember multiple things at once.
Woo! Okay, I'm seeing how understanding these traps can give you a real edge. It's like knowing the secret paths and shortcuts on a hiking trail.
That's a great way to put it. Now that we've covered those hidden traps, let's move on to some common myths about the IELTS listening test. Mr. George is really passionate about debunking these because he sees how they hold people back.
Myths? Huh. I'm ready to bust some myths. Hit me with the first one. All right, myth busting time. Let's hear what's the first myth we're tackling.
This one's a biggie. Only native speakers can score band 9. I bet that scares a lot of people off.
Yeah, it can feel pretty intimidating.
But Mr. George is adamant that it's just not true. He says a high score is totally achievable with focused practice, no matter what your native language is.
So it's more about skill than just like where you were born.
Exactly. He points out that tons of non-native speakers get amazing scores. It's all about understanding how the test works and building those listening skills.
Okay, that's good to hear. What's the next myth?
This one connects back to something we talked about earlier. Accents make it impossible to pass. Understandable to worry about that, right?
Yeah, especially if you're not used to hearing different accents.
Mr. George says it's a myth, though. The IELTS uses diverse accents, sure, but they're all standard and clear.
So it's not like they're throwing in super thick regional dialects just to mess with us.
Nope. The goal is to test your understanding of English as it's spoken globally in academic and professional settings.
Right, makes sense. But how can we get more comfortable with accents?
Practice, practice, practice. Movies, podcasts, even just talking to people from different backgrounds. The more you expose yourself, the easier it gets.
It's like training your ear to be a global citizen.
Mm.
Love it. Myth busted. What else do we need to know?
This one plays on test day nerves. You can only listen once, so it's impossible. It is true that you only get one listen, but Mr. George says preparation is key here.
So it's not about having, like, superhuman hearing.
Right. It's about making the most of that one opportunity. Practice focusing, anticipating what's coming next, and taking good notes. Like a sprinter training for a race, they only run once, but their prep determines their success.
I like that analogy. Okay, so what about the answers themselves? Are they always super obvious?
That's actually another myth. Answers are always directly stated. Mr. George warns us that examiners love to paraphrase. They're testing your vocabulary as well.
So it's not just about catching the exact words, you have to understand the meaning behind them.
Exactly. If the question asks for the lecturer's opinion, they might not say, "My opinion is." They could say, "I strongly believe," or "From my perspective."
That makes it a lot more challenging. Any advice for getting better at recognizing those paraphrased answers?
Definitely. Practice with IELTS listening transcripts. See how questions are worded. Look for synonyms and patterns, almost like building a thesaurus in your mind for the test.
Ooh, I like that. A thesaurus for my ears. What's the last myth we're busting?
This one can stress people out unnecessarily. You can use capitals or lowercase interchangeably.
Wait, so which one is right?
Mr. George says both are fine. The important thing is consistency.
Pick a style and stick with it.
Okay.
Got it.
That's right.
Wow. Mr. George has really given us so much valuable information. Feeling way more prepared now.
Me too. Remember, the IELTS listening test is challenging, but it's definitely doable.
And knowing those hidden traps and busting those myths, that's a game changer.
It really is. So, to everyone out there preparing for the IELTS, best of luck. You got this.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into IELTS listening.
Achieve your IELTS goals with Mr. George. Get ready for IELTS success with personalized guidance from Mr. George Expert Coaching at IELTS Resource Center. With years of experience and passion for teaching, they provide tailored strategies, practical exercises, and real-time feedback to help you reach your target band score. Subscribe now to access exclusive materials, personalized coaching, and flexible online sessions that fit within your schedule. This is your chance to learn from the best and confidently for every session of the IELTS exam. For more information, call or WhatsApp us at 09052964864 or 07083458307.